This lecture covers the CFA Level 1 reading on efficiency and equity. The first point to understand is that related to the allocation of resources. There are several methods for allocating scarce resources. The most basic method that we have been talking about is based on market forces and market price, where basically you have your simple supply and demand curves, and price and quantity is based on supply and demand. Then there are several other systems. The command system is what you might have in a centrally planned economy or even in the military, where the allocation of resources is basically determined by senior generals commanding what gets used where. So that's a command system. Majority rule is what you might see in a democratic system. So in a democracy, allocation of government resources is based on majority rule. So whatever the majority basically decides how government resources are allocated. A contest might be something like the Cricket World Cup. So who gets that very scarce resource? Whoever gets that resource, that's basically determined by a contest. Then you can have first come first served. So if you have a limited number of items to give out, one method might be to simply say those who come first get it. Lottery is another mechanism of deciding how scarce resources are distributed. Personal characteristics would mean something like if you have items to give away, you only give those items to people who you like. And finally, force. So burglars get resources through force, for example. Anyway, not a hugely important topic, but still you need to know one or two sentences related to each one of these bullet points. Now this is critical, the concept of marginal benefit and marginal cost. So what's marginal benefit? Marginal benefit is the benefit from consuming an additional unit of a good or service. So it is essentially the most a consumer is willing to pay for one more unit. And what you must understand is that the marginal benefit curve is basically synonymous with the demand curve. So at a given quantity of say 5 units, if you are willing to pay $10, so this represents so the $10 is a quantification of what your benefit would be of consuming or demanding the 5th unit. The core point to remember is that demand and marginal benefit are synonymous. Marginal cost is the additional cost of producing one more unit, and what you need to remember is that the supply curve is synonymous with marginal cost. There are some subtle differences, but for now we'll just say that supply and marginal cost are the same, and you will understand exactly why this is the case later on in the economics course. Okay, let's now talk about the concept of efficiency, and we will do so in the context of competitive markets. So what is efficient quantity in a competitive market? To understand efficient quantity, let's say that this is your supply curve, and this, as we have just discussed, is similar to your marginal cost, the cost of producing one additional unit. And let's say that this is your demand curve, which is the same as marginal benefit. So the benefit of consuming one additional item. All right, now the efficient quantity is the quantity right here. So this quantity is your efficient quantity, and the price over here is the price that is determined in the market. So efficiency is where the marginal benefit and the marginal cost intersect. Why is this efficient? Let's say that the quantity Q here is equal to 20 million units. Now if we are at say 18, so at 18 million units, the marginal cost to society, or the cost of producing that 18th unit, is at this point, let's say that this is 7, and the marginal benefit given by this point over here is higher. So let's say that this is 12. So at a quantity of 18, the benefit to society is more than the cost. So if you are at 18, it makes sense to keep producing more, because as you produce more, the benefit to society continues to be more than the cost to society. Now what if you are at 22? At 22, the cost to society now is 12, and the benefit to society would be about 7. So does it make sense to produce 22? It does not, because at this point the cost to society, represented by the marginal cost curve, so the cost of producing that extra unit, additional unit, is more than the benefit. So at this point we are not efficient. So here we are not efficient. At 18 units we are not efficient. So the point of efficiency is 20 million units, which is where the marginal benefit, so at that point the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost, and that's the point where we are at efficiency. And that's explained in these notes over here. The quantity supplied at equilibrium price equals the quantity demanded at equilibrium price, and efficient resource allocation occurs when marginal benefit equals marginal cost for the last unit produced and consumed. So that's what we have just explained over here. Now let's talk about the concept of consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is the benefit to consumers, So let's look at it this way. So if this is again your supply curve, and this is the demand curve. So remember, demand is your marginal benefit and supply is your marginal cost. Now what is the equilibrium price? Equilibrium price, let's say here is $10. Okay, so that's the equilibrium price. Now this region here represents the consumer surplus. Why is this the consumer surplus? Because if let's say that the equilibrium quantity is 20, for the first unit the marginal benefit, let's say, was 19. So consumers were willing to pay $19 for the first unit, but how much did they actually pay? They only paid 10. For the second unit, consumers might have been willing to pay 18, but how much did they pay? They only paid 10, and so on until we get to this point. So this whole shaded region is the consumer surplus. So that's the consumer surplus. Let's also understand the concept of producer surplus, and this region over here is the producer surplus. This is the benefit to producers. How much are producers selling for? Producers are selling for and hence getting $10 per unit. But let's say that for the first unit their marginal cost was only $1. So they produced, or their cost was $1, but they got $10. For the second unit, let's say that their cost was $2, but they got $10. So this whole region over here, until we get to this point, is the producer surplus. So this is essentially the surplus or the benefit for the producers. Now let's also understand consumer surplus with a very, very simple example that you should easily relate to. Let's say that we are talking about the demand for soft drinks. So this is quantity, this is price. Let's say that the market price for soft drinks is $1. And we are talking about the quantity of soft drinks you consume per week. Now let's say that for the first soft drink that you consume, you are actually willing to, let's say for the first soft drink you are willing to pay $3. Right, so for the first soft drink that you consume, you are willing to pay $3, but you only paid $1. For the second soft drink, let's say that you are willing to pay $2, but again the market price is 1, so you only paid $1. For the next and the third soft drink, let's say this third one over here, you pay $1. You are willing to pay $1.50, but you only paid 1. And then for the fourth one, you paid $1. So you consumed 4 soft drinks, and how much did you pay? For the 4 soft drinks, you paid $4 because the market price is $1 per soft drink. But how much were you willing to pay? And you were willing to pay 3 for the first, 2 for the second, $1.50 for the third, and so on. So you were willing to pay a whole lot more. Let's just calculate how much total you were willing to pay. So you were willing to pay 3 plus 2 plus 1.5 plus 1, which is equal to 5, 6, 7.5. So you were willing to pay $7.5. You only paid $4. So what's your surplus? Your surplus is 7.5 minus 4, which is $3.5. So that's the surplus for you as a consumer. Now, what is the surplus for society? The simple rule of thumb, which you'll see here and in general in microeconomics, the society surplus is simply the sum of the surplus for all the consumers. So if there are 100 people like you in society with similar preferences for soft drinks, then the overall consumer surplus for all of society would be 3.5 times 100. Okay, so that's the concept of consumer surplus, and you can come up with a very similar example to understand producer surplus. Alright, continuing with this concept of marginal benefit and marginal cost. Is it possible that we are not at the equilibrium amount and that we are forced for some reason to either overproduce or underproduce? That is possible. We'll study specific examples in the next reading, but let's just understand the general concept here. What does underproduction mean? Underproduction means that you are producing at a quantity to the left of equilibrium. So let's look at a underproduction example. So if this is your supply curve, and this is your demand curve, this is quantity axis, price axis. So this is your efficient point. As we said, and let's say that the efficient point is at 20 million units. Now for some reason, let's say that you are forced to underproduce at say 18 million units. Now if you underproduce, let's say there's some sort of a quota. So quota is at 18. Now the supply, or so basically at 18, consumers are willing to pay a high amount. Let's say consumers are willing to pay $45 per unit. So consumers are willing to pay $45 per unit. So they are willing to pay a whole lot more than the cost of supplying. So let's say that the cost of supplying is only $30 per unit. So the cost of supplying is $30 per unit. People are willing to produce willing to pay 45. So people are willing to pay a whole lot more than how much the product costs. So we are stuck over here. This region is what is called dead weight loss, because this was potentially beneficial to society with the demand, which is the same as marginal benefit, being higher than the marginal cost. So in this region, the benefit to society would still have been more than the cost to society, and we are losing out on this region. So this region is actually called the dead weight loss, and dead weight is a measure of inefficiency. The more this area, or the more the dead weight, the more inefficient your situation is. So this is one example of inefficiency due to underproduction. What about overproduction? Overproduction means that you are producing at a quantity to the right of equilibrium. So let's draw a simple picture for that. So this is your, again, your marginal, so this is your supply curve, which is the same as marginal cost, and this is your demand curve, which is the same as marginal benefit. That's the equilibrium amount. Now overproduction means that you are producing over here. So if you are overproducing, what's the issue here? The issue here is that the cost to society, which is represented by this dark region, is more than the benefit to society. So if the cost of producing something is more than the benefit, clearly that's inefficient. And the measure of inefficiency again is deadweight loss, which is represented by this region that I have shaded. So this again is deadweight loss. The more the deadweight loss, the more inefficient your situation. So let's now talk about obstacles to efficient allocation. These three obstacles, price control, taxes, monopolies, we will cover these in a lot of detail in the next reading, so I will skip them for now. But let's spend a little bit of time on the remaining four. You need to understand, you just have at least a 1 or 2 line understanding of each one of these items. What are external costs? So external costs are costs that are incurred by somebody other than the entity producing. So for example, let's take a pharmaceutical company. If the pharmaceutical company is producing medicines, but they are also creating a lot of pollution and dumping the pollution in the river, for example, the cost of the cost of pollution, who is bearing the cost of pollution? The cost of pollution is not being borne by the pharmaceutical company here, it's being borne by society. So what does that encourage the pharmaceutical company to do? So if the pharmaceutical company is not bearing all its costs, what it might do is overproduce. So its cost curve is not depictive of the overall society's cost, and therefore what the pharmaceutical company might do is overproduce. So that's what happens when you have external costs. What are external benefits? So external benefits are benefits that are enjoyed by people other than those who are paying for them. So for example, let's say that you have an office complex, and within the office complex you have a small little park. Now who is actually paying for this complex? It's all the offices that have taken a space in that complex. So obviously these offices benefit from the small park in the middle, but in addition, any visitors to the area will also benefit from the park. So the marginal benefit curve for this setup does not reflect the benefit that is received by the casual visitors, and since their benefit is not represented from a society perspective, whenever you have external benefits, there will be a underproduction of nice parks such as this one. So those are external benefits. What are public goods? So public goods are things like roads, highways, national defense, etc. Now you benefit from roads and highways regardless of whether you pay for them. So if we simply had a free market system, we might potentially have what's called the free rider problem, where you might say that I'm going to benefit from the roads and highways anyway because others will pay for them, so why should I pay for them? So that explains why the free market system is not going to produce the efficient or optimum amount of roads and highways, and hence governments rely on taxation to ensure that there is a efficient amount of public goods available in society. What's a common resource? Common resource you can think of as unrestricted ocean fishery. So basically in a unrestricted ocean fishery, you might have fishermen who basically they can go fish, but they are not paying the cost of fishing. So if they are not paying any costs, what is likely to happen in this fishery? What is likely to happen is overuse of this fishery and overfishing. So how do governments overcome this problem? They basically put restrictions and ensure that fishermen have appropriate licenses and so on, so as to avoid overuse. The final slide in this relatively short reading is on the concept of fairness principles. Economists like to think about how society can be set up so as to make it as fair as possible, and you need to understand two broad views or economic philosophies. One philosophy is that called utilitarianism, which was put forward by an English philosopher called John Stuart Mill. Now, he suggested that economic wealth should be equalized to provide maximum benefit. The point is this, that if you are a millionaire, the benefit of $1 extra to you as a millionaire is not going to be too much. Versus a very poor man, for him that extra dollar is going to provide a huge amount of benefit. So he suggested that taking money from here and giving it to the poor person is going to make society happier. So basically you can think of this as a Robin Hood philosophy. What's wrong with this? In principle it sounds good, but what are the issues? The issues are that it potentially creates a fair amount of inefficiency. If you have high taxation of the rich people over here, they will lose their incentive to work. So if these people are not going to have any incentive to work because they believe that whatever money they earn or most of what they earn will be taken away, then that creates huge efficiency losses in society. So that's one issue. The other issue is, to create this redistribution, you need a whole taxation system. Obviously the taxation system in of itself is not adding any value. But we need to pay people to create this system and create this process, and that in of itself is efficient, because we are creating this whole revenue distribution department that is simply taking money from the rich, giving to the poor, not making society better off in any other way. So those are potential issues with the utilitarianism philosophy. The other fairness principle is that of symmetry. And according to this philosophy, what is important is the equality of opportunity, not of results. So the point here is that everybody in society should have similar opportunities. Everybody should get a good education, good health care, and so on. And then with those opportunities, those who work hard will do well, and those who don't work hard might not do so well. But that is fair because everybody had the same opportunity. So that's the fundamental principle over here. What are the prerequisites for this principle of symmetry to work? There are two fundamental prerequisites. One is that the government must enforce private property, which means that if you own something, if you have earned something, then that is yours, and you can only, somebody else gets it from you only if there is a voluntary exchange. So when you work hard to earn something or buy something, that is yours, and it will stay yours until you willingly decide to part with it. So only if those two prerequisites exist will the system of symmetry work. And that's it for now. As always, you need to go back to the curriculum and your study notes and practice as many questions as possible to properly understand this material.